Hey everyone. Today on the I Care About You podcast, we are discussing feelings of profound sense of failure. We will discuss the emotions and the actions failure can bring up, outcomes that might occur, and thoughts of failure, and how to move beyond the effects of failing. And when something happens in your life that isn't so positive, how do you work through it and overcome it? And what are the consequences that might occur should you decide to do nothing or should you do something? So I'm Juliana J. And before we begin, please subscribe to the podcast. It really helps me a lot and it helps me figure out what content I should put up next. Leave comments if you like. That would be wonderful. And I also want to just say that there's a link to my book in the description, and I hope that you will look at it. I'm going to touch on a few things that are in the book in this particular podcast, but Reasons to Live has a whole bunch of other things to offer you. So I hope you'll take a look at that book. Again, that's my book. It came out in September. It's called Reasons to Live, and I'll put a link in the description. So let's get to it. First, I want to say that failing is a necessary part of life. We need to fail in order to understand. It's a universal lesson on the path to success. Although our culture defines failure as a bad thing, it can actually be very helpful and, in fact, beneficial in many ways. That said, it's always an emotional roller coaster that leaves you drained and insecure. Failure can be very damaging to our relationships, our work life, and can create lifelong problems that hinder our ability to be successful in life in a whole range of things. Failure is just a part of life, whether we like it or not. It's here. You can't avoid it. You're going to experience it. We all fail at very meaningful things in life and at things related to having fun, like trying a new sport and you're really bad at first, or bombing a toast at a wedding or a speech or a job interview, failing to bring something to a party when you should have, falling in the mud while you're wearing a new outfit, something I've done more than once. It happens a lot in life, and learning how to deal with failure is a much needed skill for happiness and success in life. First, let's talk about the feelings and actions attached to failure. Here's a few of them, but there are many, many more. And also, these feelings are tied to what type of quote-unquote failure. And when I use the word failure, I want you to know I'm mentally putting that in quotes every time because I don't necessarily think failure is failure, but I'm using that word because I think it's universal and people understand what I'm talking about. But I don't necessarily think you should define things that happen in your life as quote unquote failures. So when I use that word, no, I'm putting it in quotes, and that I'm using it in a universal kind of way. So failure, like I said, can be very small, falling, or it can be very large, losing a relationship, a breakup, losing a job, losing everything. Let's talk about what some of those feelings and actions attached to failure might look like. Anger is a huge one. Anger is often the first emotion we feel simply because it's a defense mechanism. It's protective. It keeps people away. It gives you space to kind of analyze what just happened. If you're blindsided by some sort of failure, like maybe it's a layoff or a breakup or something, anger is usually the first place you go. It's just natural part of human life to use anger to kind of protect you in a way. It's very protective. Other things you might experience are grief. When you lose anything, the loss of anything, whether it be an actual living human or creature, or it's losing a job or a relationship or something like that, loss brings up grief. There can also be a lot of shame. Grief can kind of manifest shame in a way, regrets, things like that. Shame is also part of just feeling like you're not living up to a certain something. You feel like you did something wrong, you're guilty, and guilty can walk you straight into shame if you're not careful. So you might feel guilty too. You might have denial. There might be sadness or even depression. You might lie to yourself and others about the situation, and then that sort of compounds the feeling of shame and sadness and guilt. You might just stuff it down and never even look at it or think about it again. You might lash out. That's part of that whole anger thing, but you might lash out in ways you regret later on. Of course, crying, that's my go-to myself. Heightened emotions. You might feel very vulnerable and very heightened in your emotions, and they come quickly and you're not really prepared. Feelings of fragility, feelings of insecurity, embarrassment. You might obsess about the issue and just really go through a series of emotions quite quickly. Maybe as a consequence, you'll self-medicate more. You'll withdraw because you're embarrassed or you don't know how to react to the situation. Maybe gaslighting is an issue or a toxic relationship of some kind has sort of led to this quote unquote failure. Perhaps manipulation has occurred. And even though you realize the failure was fabricated by someone else, you still feel like the failure is true, that you are a failure in some way. Maybe it leads to a failure to see that this relationship was toxic or that this person was doing this to me or whatever it might be. Failed to see the other person's tactics or games. And you might feel like, that's a failure too. So even though the initial thing you were blamed for was not actually your failing, you might twist that into, but I failed to see that happening when it was happening. So what are the outcomes after you've kind of run that gamut of all these feelings and things you might do? What are some of the outcomes and how do you deal with them? So failure can really mess with your self-esteem and give you a loss of self-esteem, a loss of self-worth, a loss of self-love, all of this because you use that failure as a way to support your negative beliefs about yourself, that you aren't worthy, that you aren't lovable, and that you're a loser or stupid or whatever it is that is part of what you've defined as good self-esteem. It reinforces imposter syndrome, especially if you lose a job or something like that. There's a failure at work or something of that nature. It can reinforce feelings that you are unlovable, possibly if there's a relationship breakup or even a friend fight or anything like that. These feelings can bring up a lot of anxiety. I'm going to do a podcast on anxiety in the future. I'm still doing a lot of research on that, but anxiety is really stems back to these certain feelings will give you this mechanism called anxiety. So anxiety can really come up because failure is huge in the feelings department. You might have feelings of insecurity, anger that can lead to actions you later regret, as we spoke of. You might feel isolation from others, especially if it's a breakup or a job loss. All of a sudden you have to divvy up friends or you don't have a way to interact with coworkers like you did before. How do we deal with all of these feelings and thoughts and emotions and reactions? We can push it down. We can refuse to see it. We can do a whole host of things. We can fall into a big sadness or depression. We can use it to define ourselves negatively. We can use it to define the world negatively. Everyone's out to get us. We can reinforce negative beliefs that we have about ourselves and others and the world when something negative happens to us. And failure, oh, it just hurts so deeply in your heart, doesn't it? It just really grabs you. And it's hard to navigate all of us, all of those feelings, all of us. Hard to navigate all of us too, but it's hard to navigate those feelings. So how do we stop ourselves from spiraling into all the negative spaces that you can so easily spiral into when something like failure happens to you? Here are just a few things that you can do. There's so much more, but here's a few things that you can do to kind of help you work through this problem. First off, it's important to take time to grieve. Take time to grieve the relationship that was lost, the job that was lost. Maybe it's your own security at work was lost. Maybe it is your feelings that you can do something or you're capable. Just take time to grieve what you feel like you've lost, whatever that is, of not using the time to self-berate or reinforce negative self-beliefs. Instead, you can mourn the loss or what the failure signifies. And if you need help with this, you can use statements about the situations like, I am sad about the loss of my job. I miss my office. I miss my coworkers. And so on. It could be, I am sad about the loss of this relationship. I miss seeing so-and-so every day. I miss sex or whatever it is. You can kind of define those things that were lost in the failure and grieve them. Grieve them. but don't use it as a way to self-berate or to work grief and guilt into shame. Another thing that's very, very important is to surround yourself with support. A support system is everything in everything that you do. You may have to tell them what you want. This is really outlined in my book, Reasons to Live. For example, you may need your support, but you don't want them to solve your issues. You want them to listen deeply and to ask you how they can help, but you don't want them to offer any advice. You might have to tell them that up front so that they're aware of how they can best support you. I talk about this a lot in my book. How do you ask for help? How do you get what you need? You may have to remind your support network of your rules now and again, or your boundaries. But it's important to feel loved and secure at this time and to feel like you can lean on someone if you need to. This is the big one that's really hard to do. Be real with yourself and be honest. Name your feelings and spend some time working with them. Name it. It hurts. It's sad. I feel extreme loss. Ask yourself questions like, I wonder if I will ever be whole again. How can I trust people again? I wonder if I'll ever be able to feel good about what I do or to feel good in a relationship. How will I overcome this situation? Answer the questions about how to move past this. You may not know for a long time, but keep asking yourself, how will I trust people again? What do I need in order to trust people again after this situation has occurred? What do I need? Do I need people to prove they're trustworthy to me? And if so, what would that look like? What are the things that I think a trustworthy person has? And list them all out and keep breaking it down until you've broken it all the way down. And you can say to yourself, what I need to move past this and to be able to trust people again is this thing. This, and how will I know that I've gotten those things? By these things. Just keep breaking it down and be real with yourself. If you played a role in the failure, what is your role? Maybe your role is just, I didn't stand up for myself, or I let this go too far, whatever it is. Maybe it's something simple. Maybe it's something large. Maybe it's just another thing is be good to yourself. Give yourself grace, be kind, be loving, practice self-care, do all these things to be good to yourself, to help yourself just feel okay. A failure hurts. It hurts deeply. And not beating yourself up more about it or berating yourself, but just spending some time to be good for yourself. You can say, yes, I totally messed up. I own all of this. This was my fault. I did something really horrible. And you can really, really own it. But you also need to find that little bit of space where you can have grace for yourself. You don't beat yourself up or think you're nothing or you're not capable of anything positive anymore because you're such a horrible person. And don't walk down that road. You can own it without berating yourself. And you can give yourself some grace, no matter what. You can give yourself some kindness and you can practice self-care at this time. It kind of helps take your mind off of it too, so you don't go down that spiral of obsessing about what a failure you are or any of the other negative things you tell yourself on a daily basis. Part of the self-care is checking in with yourself. How are you doing? How can you make things better today? What are your next steps? What goals do you have? When you get in a place where things aren't so raw, you might ask yourself, what can I learn? What good things can I see? So this is kind of three-part actually. The part of the self-care is to check in with yourself every once in a while to know that you're okay. Sometimes we don't take the time to check in with ourselves and we don't know we're not okay until some small little tiny thing happens and it puts us over the edge, like the bottom falls out of our grocery bag as we're walking to the front door. And that's it. You just lose it. It can be something like that. So check in with yourself every once in a while about what you can do to make things a little better each day or to address things or whatever that is. And then once you're in a place where things aren't so raw, you might look at what you can learn. What is good here in this tangle of all these other things? Is there anything good I can find? Any lesson in there? I know people don't really want to hear this one a lot of the times, and it makes them mad for whatever reason. But when you use failure in this way, it becomes a bit more healed. And as I said at the very beginning, we all experience failure. It's part of learning. To fail but not look for the lesson, you're missing the point of the failure, and you're just using it to feel bad about yourself or be mad at other people rather than the true reason why it's there. Use failure as a catalyst for the next thing. If you failed at a job, what did you learn that you can do better the next time around? I can say this is certainly true for me. If any of you caught the podcast a few weeks ago on failure, I talk about this recent failure of mine, and boy, did I learn from that experience. Another thing you can do is use rituals. Some people find rituals very helpful when they're feeling they need to let go of things. It can be yelling the things out and releasing them to the ocean, or standing on top of a mountain and doing the same thing, or yelling to the sky, or yelling when a busy train goes by so no one can hear you, but you know you're yelling out what you want to let go of. It might be writing it on a piece of paper and then destroying it in a safe way, like burning it in a safe way. It might be writing a letter to the person that was part of the failure, and maybe you never send it, but you write it anyway. I find this particularly helpful if I want to let go of my unresolved feelings with someone, is to write them a letter. I've written somebody numerous letters before, and by the time I've written all of it out, I can let it go. It's really helpful when you feel like the failure is tied up in some sort of relationship. And as always, get professional help if the failure is traumatic and there are many issues stemming from a situation. And if you feel it's too much to take on your own, get professional help. It's part of your support system that I talked about earlier. A professional can be a therapist, a doctor, a coach, or any other modality that resonates with you. Help is a good thing. Some consider help as a failure in itself, which is a bizarre cultural belief that keeps people isolated. That belief system does no one any good. It is taking independence way too far and twisting the meaning of what it is to be independent. Being independent isn't about not needing help ever. It's about knowing what you need and being proactive in what you need. It's about knowing when you need it. Try not to dwell too much on the failure. I have a friend that only allows herself to be sad about a recent divorce, which she considers her biggest failing in life, 30 minutes a day. 30 minutes a day, she allows herself to think only about the divorce. During the 30 minutes, she cries, she yells, she allows herself to be consumed in the thoughts surrounding the divorce. But once the 30-minute timer goes off, she stops and refocuses on her day. I'm not saying that you have to do this, but find balance with it. Otherwise, it will start to cloud all the good things you have in life. Don't dwell on it so deeply, it becomes all you can see and it clouds your view. That is how self-hatred, doubt, and insecurities are formed. When you spend all your time concentrating on that negative thing and you fail to see positive things that are in your life. Give your failure a silly name. For one, just change the word of failure to something else. It isn't a failure, it's a funny word like gorilla or trash heap. Redefining it can take away some of its power that it has over you. If you change it from the dark cloud that's above you to a grumpy donut, the name is silly. So the sillier name, the better, and you would be surprised how much this helps. Because failure, that word is really charged, right? And any of those words associated with not doing well is really charged. And it immediately, before you even think about it, because you're so conditioned and you know so much about it, immediately your body starts to feel the effects. Your mind starts to subconsciously think about failure, and that's grave. But if you call it a grumpy donut, you have to really think about what that is. It brings up some funny thing in your mind, and you can kind of free yourself from all the other connotations around the word failure and all those other words that come with it. Redefine it. Is the situation a job loss or an opportunity to change careers? Is the breakup a loss of the love of your life or a chance to find somebody who really gets you just as you are? I know this sounds somewhat juvenile, but redefining it can sometimes allow you to see what the situation is presenting to you beyond all the unhappiness and challenges around it. It will enable you to see the doors that have opened, and it gives you a new focus and a new direction and something else to concentrate on. You can only concentrate on the failure so long, and that's different for everyone. And people, like, the next day they're on to fixing what the situation is, and other people will sit with it for weeks and months. It's being able to switch the focus and the direction so that you don't end up wallowing in it accidentally because you don't know where to go. You have to change the direction at sometimes so you can walk out of that dark forest, right? You've got to start moving. Find comfort in a friend, a pet, a place in nature, doing something you love, and just looking at beautiful things, going somewhere that has always comforted you. Find comfort that is healthy. Don't eat your way through the ice cream aisle or drink 7 bottles of wine in one sitting, but maybe you go on a walk or you visit a friend or something more positive that just is comforting to you in some way. Maybe it's watching an old movie you love or rereading a book or listening to music. There's so many things you can do that you can find comfort in. I'm pretty lucky. I do have a few pets and they're super comforting and they always know when you're feeling sad. Those things, that finding comfort, even if it's something really small like a cup of tea or comfy socks or your favorite sweatshirt, whatever you can do in these small ways to find comfort is so helpful. And that's true anytime in your life, not just when you're dealing with something big. There are many other ways to work through these trying times, and it's important to find what works for you and what is right for you. So try a bunch of little things. Maybe the silly name is not your jam, but you can redefine the failure. It's all different. So please let me know how it's going for you. You can always get a hold of me through my website, or you can DM me or schedule some time with me. And please comment about how it's going for you. I'd love to hear. And there's a lot of good information, like I said, in my book, Reasons to Live, which will be linked in the description. But for now, take good care, my friends. Know that I love you and I support you, and you can do this. You are worthy of working through this problem. It does not define you.